Hola guys and girls, and welcome to the post-draft power rankings of the GPC Season 3. I am your host, El Ciso, aka Lars, coach of the Borussia Dortmund in the GBA, and ex-coach of the Borussia Dortmund in the GBC Season 1 and 2. And yeah, I will be one of the analysts for this season. Same goes with Jbro, and Nacho, and Kino, all of you which will you meet in other videos, or even in this one. But yeah, these are the power rankings, and the post-draft power rankings, so no battles have yet been played. We are only ranking them by the draft, nothing else. We decided on not putting a previous experience in the format or stuff like some of these guys we know already, we know how they battle and stuff, but that would be a bit unfair for the new guys, so we decided to only rank for drafts. No further experience is going to be added. Other things I want to talk about before we start showing the rankings and stuff. The first thing, like I said, we only rank draft, blah blah blah. I said that. Next thing, if you disagree with your ranking at some point, like maybe you would rank yourself higher than we did, then the best reason, the best way basically to show is that we are wrong is not going into the comment section and saying, oh, but my draft can do this and can do this and can do this and you didn't say this and blah blah blah. The best way to prove us that we are wrong is on the battlefield and not in the comment section. Prove us wrong in the battles, show us that we're wrong with what we are doing, and yeah, then we all be happy and rank you higher in the next power rankings. But yeah, this out of the way. Now for the rules of our power ranking system. Like, we have 4 analysts, we have 4 power rankings, each of one did one for themselves. And what we will do is if two teams will battle each week, of course the teams will battle each week, but if a higher ranked team battles versus a lower ranked team and wins, like for example, let's go over my list. I have Swansea City at first. Let's say Swansea City loses to the New York Jumblers, which I have at 6th place. That means I would lose 1 point. Minus 1 point for me. Other way around, if for example the VC Reshiram, which I have at 5, wins versus the Toronto Torteras, which I have at 10th, that it's a +1 for me. +1 point for me. And that way we will have a point ranking system of each of our 4 analysts, and yeah, we can all race to being the best analyst in the GBC this way. And yeah, that's even if you are wrong and rate someone lower than us, we are getting hurt for that. We want to try to rank you as good as possible, so yeah, that's basically the race we will have to go for. I of course will be part in that, and I will win this whole thing, of course, because I'm not only best battler, I'm of course the best analyst too. But yeah, these are basically the rules to this. You can see the power rankings right now, at least one part of it. I don't know how I will do the GFX by now. But yeah, this first power rankings, usually it would be me and a guest, but we were all very busy. I want to record with Jbro, but we couldn't adjust our schedule, so this one will be kind of the weird one, because Jbro was still nice enough to record his thoughts on the power rankings and stuff on a separate sound file, which I will edit later in. But this means we will only hear Jbro's thoughts. I was trying to commentate and add Jbro's in on the right time, but it just looks so weird. I don't know what you all talked about. I couldn't react to anything. It just feels weird. So this time you have to be with us. This time it will only be Jbro's sound file played later, him talking about his power rankings. If one of the players wants reasoning why he's there or just ask me on Skype or whatever. I have you on Skype or Twitter, and I give you my reasoning why I rank you there and I was higher and stuff. But in this video we will only hear Jbro. So that's all. You can see the power rankings here, and yeah, Jbro, I give the mic to you.
Hello there everybody, this is Jbro63.9 and I am one of the analysts for the GPC's 3rd season, as well as a veteran from previous seasons. If you might remember my team, the Orlando Helix, I've recently undergone team changes and converted to the 5 Island Fossils, but I am not in this season of the GPC, and I will be analyzing it along with Lars and Nacho and Kino. So here are my thoughts on everybody's drafts. This is recorded separately from Lars's recording, so he will edit this in afterwards. I don't know if Tim and Nacho will do theirs, but we'll see. So we're going to start from the bottom and work our way up to the top. Now when it came to grading these teams, I put a few things into mind. I put certain abilities the team members had, the synergies of the team, some basic requirements they missed. So we're going to start off with what I put at the bottom of my ranking, the Philadelphia Focus miss. Now simply put, looking at this team, a lot of it looks like it was derived from seeing people play in ladder. And the reason I say that is because he went right off the bat with Gengar and Keldeo, both of which aren't as good in the draft format as they are in ladder, but they're still effective. So his full draft is Gengar, Keldeo, Mega Lopunny, Bronzong, Flygon, Whimsicott, Lantern, Golbat, Serperior, Drapion, Zangoose, and Swadloon. Some notes I have about this team: there's limited setup sweepers. Very few Pokemon on this team can start to build up their stats and sweep the rest of the team, other than Serperior. Serperior is really the only good Pokemon on his team that can do that, except for, maybe Mega Lopunny, but Mega Lopunny isn't known for being a setup sweeper. Then we have a humongous ice weakness on this team. We have Flygon is weak to ice, Golbat's weak to ice, Serperior is weak to ice, Swadloon is weak to ice, Whimsicott's weak to ice. That's a lot of ice weaknesses. Too many ice weaknesses. So that could be a huge problem for when he has to face certain Pokemon such as Mamoswine, or, well, basically Mamoswine, Weavile. So, stuff like that. It's difficult to work around an ice weakness. That is a huge ice weakness. His team is also a little bit psychic weak, with Gengar, Keldeo, and Mega Lopunny and Golbat being weak to ice. I mean, not ice, psychic. They're all weak to psychic. His team does have a good offensive presence, I will say. There are a lot of good threats on his team. But unfortunately, his team is also full of one-trick ponies, which, in my definition, is basically Pokemon that can do one thing well, and that's it. So, for example, you have Lantern. What can it do? It can absorb water, electric attacks, and Volt Switch, and maybe heal things. That's really it. That's all it can do. Or you have Serperior. Well, in most cases, even if you don't run this and you run screens instead, most of the time you're just going to have Leaf Storm, Contrary Sweep. I don't know, maybe those aren't good examples. Zangoose is a good example because it gets Toxic Boost, so really all you're going to do is just give it the Toxic Orb and let it wreak havoc on things with Facade. That's all there is to it. Swadloon, not the greatest choice. I know it was a joke, but I still don't think that's that great of a decision. And not to mention, the coverage of his team as a whole, offensively, is not the greatest. For example, there's no big Fire Stab, which will severely hinder him for the season against certain opponents, as Fire Stab is always something good to keep in mind. So, with that in mind, the Philadelphia Focus Mists are at the bottom. I would like to clarify, none of these teams are bad. I just think the Philadelphia Focus Mists fell short of the others. Coming in 15th, I have the Detroit Draco Droppers with Weavile, Dragonite, Magnezone, Mega Gallade, Donphan, Florges, Swampert, Chestnut, and Typhlosion. So here's the thing with his team. He has great physical threats on his team. Awesome physical threats. He has Weavile and Dragonite, which are both very scary. He has Mega Gallade, which is one of the scariest Megas in the draft format meta. And then he has Swampert and Chestnut, which are both defensive and can both deal out big damage. So, very good physical threats. But unfortunately, he doesn't have many good special threats. Now, why do I say this? Well, first off, he has Magnezone. Magnezone, despite being good, is not nearly as good as it is in ladder. And I know this from experience with the Orlando Helix. Magnezone did not do what I hoped it would do. So it's kind of bleh. Typhlosion's good, but his move pool is very limited. And Florges has more of a special wall than anything, so unfortunately I think the Detroit Draco Droppers fell kind of behind in that aspect. As I already mentioned, the team is very physically defensive, pretty good specially defensive as well. Now unfortunately with this team there are also 4 separate quad weaknesses on this team, which is very bad when it comes to making teams. You have Weavile, who's 4 times weak to fighting, Dragonite, who's 4 times weak to ice, Magnezone, who's 4 times weak to ground, and Swampert, who's 4 times weak to grass. And actually, there's also Chestnut, which is 4 times weak to flying, so 5 4 times weaknesses. 5 quad weaknesses, rather. And I don't think that's really going to help him out much when it comes to making teams, but we'll have to see. His team's also a little bit fairy weak, and he doesn't have a very good hazard clearer. He is Donphan, which if there are already hazards on the field and you switch in Donphan, what's going to happen is you're going to get rid of the rocks, but you won't have Sturdy anymore. So he's not the greatest in format. Donphan is certainly good, but I haven't seen a Donphan work well in League format, so that's just my opinion on the matter. His team does have good coverage, though, I will say. His team does have good offensive coverage compared to some of the other teams. So they are in 15th. 14th, I have the Vespiquen Park Rangers with Landorus Therian, Mega Ampharos, Infernape, Slowking, Mandibuzz, Azelf, Scolipede, Exploud, Snorlax, Garbodor, Aggron, and Tangela. Now, this team has two big weaknesses to it. It has a big ice weakness and a big ground weakness. Simply put, the Landorus T, the Mega Ampharos aren't really helping. The Mandibuzz, not going to help out a ton. Tangela, obviously, a big ice weakness problem. And then with the ground weakness, you have Mega Ampharos, you have Infernape, you have Garbodor and Aggron. So it's not the greatest combination of types here, but he does have a good offensive balance when it comes to physical versus special offense. And his coverage is definitely good. Another thing, though, I would like to note about this team, from what I found, this team doesn't have a Cleric, and Clerics can be very helpful in certain situations. Clerics, in my definition, are things that can either heal the status of all your other team members or go for Wish, which allows other team members to regain HP. Normally Clerics are very, very helpful, but I don't think there are any Clerics on this team, so that kind of hinders him also a little bit. And he has a lot of one-trick ponies, like I mentioned before, so not the greatest combination of Pokemon, but his Pokemon are all very good individually, and I think this team definitely could pull off some awesome feats if it's played correctly. So, 14th for the Park Rangers. Coming in at 13th, I have the Edinburgh Knights. Now, the Edinburgh Knights, this is quite a team. It's a very peculiar team, but I like it. Heatran, Mega Medicham, Vaporeon, Diggersby, Dragalge, Jolteon, Tornadus Incarnate, Ludicolo, Togetic, Cloyster, Zoroark, and Ditto. This team is a little bit fighting weak and a little bit electric weak when it comes to weaknesses as a whole, but the team could definitely work very well together. Actually, I should also mention there's a little bit of a ground weakness, but nothing severe. Now this team, of course, it does have a very, very good offensive presence. When you have Mega Medicham and Diggersby on the same team, people will be scared. That's all there is to it. It's a horrifying combination. Not to mention he has Heatran and Jolteon and Tornadus Incarnate, which are all very scary on their own rights, and Zoroark, which can completely change the way how people play around your team. So that's definitely helpful. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to this team, the team does become a bit too reliant on Togetic, because Togetic is the only hazard remover on this team. So, unfortunately, what could end up happening is if Togetic dies and there are a lot of hazards on the Edinburgh Knights' side of the field, they could be severely hindered by Toxic Spikes or Stealth Rock, whatever it may be at the time. So, the coach is going to, Bluesy, John, the coach of the Edinburgh Knights, is definitely going to have to keep that in mind when it comes to his battles. But the good thing is, with his team as well, he does have very good offensive coverage. So they come in 13th. Then we get into the third quarter of these picks. We have the Manchester Meganiums in 12th for my lineup in a draft power rankings. My bad. I cannot talk today. He has Mega Gardevoir, Mamoswine, Reuniclus, Tornadus Therian, Blastoise, Bisharp, Talonflame, Heracross, Electabuzz, and Meganium. This is a good team. It has great synergies and a great offensive presence, and I think that could definitely help him out in several different ways. Now, one thing I will like to mention about this team, he doesn't have the best walls. He has Reuniclus, which could be a wall, but isn't always a wall. He has Blastoise, which is an okay wall, but again, not a great wall. And he has Meganium, which I know he likes to run the Swords Dance set on his Meganiums, because he is very much in love with his Meganium. Meganium is his mascot. He loves Meganiums, and I don't blame him. Meganium's great, but only these 3 walls aren't necessarily the greatest lineup of defensive Pokemon that he could have. He could run defensive Mamoswine if he wanted to, but I don't think the walls will help him out necessarily when it comes to taking hits too much. We're going to have to see how he plays them. He does meet all the general criteria, so he's got priority, he's got clerics, he's got bulky and speedy offense, he's got all sorts of crazy shenanigans. It's pretty great. But hazards might be bad for his team. And I say this because, again, he doesn't have the best of hazard removers. He has Blastoise. Blastoise is pretty good. Blastoise is definitely a good hazard remover, but there are better hazard removers out there. So I think he could have a problem with hazards, especially if he wants to keep that Talonflame alive as long as possible. Because Talonflame and Tornadus, while very scary in their own rights, might not work the greatest if he doesn't play around hazards effectively. He does have very good offensive coverage though, so Manchester Meganiums have come into 12th. Coming into 11th, I have the Parasens with Scizor, Togekiss, Mega Manectric, Shaman, Goodra, Volcarona, Slowbro, Aerodactyl, Steelix, and Kabutops. Now this team has a few big weaknesses. It's a bit rock weak, it's a bit ice weak, and it's a bit fairy weak. There's a few, like, those common weaknesses aren't necessarily that helpful for the team, but thankfully the Parasens do have a great balance of stats, and they meet all the general criteria when it comes to making a team. So they have all sorts of variety that they can bring into battle. They have a lot of good Pokemon at their disposal. Of course, Slowbro, Scizor, and Togekiss alone are absolutely fantastic. He's got a great balance of Pokemon, and of course, I have to give the man respect for having 2 fossils on his team, Aerodactyl and Kabutops. This man has good taste, let me tell you. In all seriousness, though, it's a good team. I think it could work out. Depending on the matchups, this team definitely has the potential to become something very dangerous if played correctly. So 11th place. 10th place, I have the Toronto Torterras with a bit of a crazy team here. Mega Altaria, Excadrill, Tyranitar, Rotom Heat, Roserade, Gastrodon, Honchkrow, Machamp, Dusclops, Floatzel, Ariados, and Gigalith. So let me just say right off the bat, this team has a really good physical offensive presence. There are so many physical threats on this team that you cannot come into a battle against this team without a physical wall. So many good threats. There's Tyranitar and Excadrill, which are very scary thanks to the Sandstorm. You have Honchkrow, which can deal some serious damage with Brave Bird or Sucker Punch or whatever it goes for. You have Machamp and Floatzel, which are both scary in their own right. And then of course you have Gigalith, who isn't the greatest, but is still very strong. Nonetheless, it doesn't look that great, and its stats aren't that great, but it's still strong, and you can't knock it for that. Now unfortunately this team does fall flat in a few areas. It's a little bit ground weak. It has no Cleric. A lot of the weaknesses are shared between certain Pokemon, so he's going to have to work around some weaknesses, and he has a bit of a lack of variety in his walls, and I say that because some of his walls aren't the best sort of walls. He has Rotom Heat and Gastrodon and Dusclops as his main walls, and then he could run a few other things as walls, even though they work as offense a little better. Now the thing is with that is, you look at his team, and none of his walls can heal themselves except for Gastrodon, and unless you want to count Pain Split on Dusclops. When it comes to Gastrodon, he has a type immunity, and so does Rotom Heat, but Dusclops can only be immune to 2 types, which aren't too bad against his team anyway. So it's not like he's really going to have to worry too much about a fighting weakness or normal weakness, because the rest of his team isn't too weak to those types in the first place. So that being said, I also think that Ariados is a bit of a dumb decision. Ariados is not that good, and I think what he could have done instead is taken all of these 2-point expenses at the bottom of his draft, Floatzel, Ariados, and Gigalith, and the 2 remaining points he left at the end of the draft, and possibly spent that on something a little bit more worth the value. But he didn't, and he went with a bunch of cheap choices, so I think that kind of hinders how his team is ranked in my power rankings. So that puts him down at 10th. 9th place, I have the Dunsparcenal with, if I can actually pull up the page, Clefable, Mega Aerodactyl, Starmie, Nidoqueen, Rotom-Mow, Spiritomb, Hariyama, Darmanitan, Klefki, Noivern, and Wynaut. This is a really good team, especially in terms of its defensive cores. The defensive cores that he could pull off with a Clefable, Rotom-Mow, Spiritomb, and a Klefki are very, very immense, and it will definitely help him out when it comes to building teams. The team as a whole is a little bit Ice Weak, which I think kind of holds him back, but not by that much, considering that a lot of these Ice weaknesses don't even have to be brought to every single battle. Mega Aerodactyl and Rotom-Mow might be an issue, especially if he's going to pair them up with, say, Nidoqueen or Noivern, but as a whole, it's not too terrible. But one thing I do think holds him back a little bit is that he has Wynaut on his team, and people are going to over-prepare for Wynaut when Wynaut isn't really that great. As far as I'm concerned, I don't even think it gets Shadow Tag. So people are going to over-prep for it, but it isn't really usable to begin with. So the walls that he does have, most of them can't restore their own HP, which is kind of an issue. Only Clefable can restore its own HP out of the walls on this team, so it might be a bit of an issue. We're going to have to see. But as a whole, this team is definitely good. Good offensive coverage, great defensive cores, so I really enjoy it. And this is 9th place, by the way. A lot of these teams are incredibly good. So moving on to 8th place, I have the Lorient Love Discs. Now this team, one of the newer teams to the season, took a really good draft, I have to say. I don't know if they have experience before or not, but his team is Hydreigon, Megascizor, Tentacruel, Chandelure, Terrakion, Staraptor, Nidoking, Electros, Mesprit, Vileplume, and Lickilicky. Now, the thing is that when he has a lot of big weaknesses on his team, but he has a lot of things to check those weaknesses. So right off the bat, he doesn't have many huge weaknesses he needs to worry about. He has a great offensive presence with several of his Pokemon, being mainly Hydreigon and Megascizor. Those two are absolutely horrifying. Not to mention, actually a majority of his draft is horrifying. Chandelure, Terrakion, Staraptor, Nidoking, Electros. Yikes. Horrifying stuff here. Now, and he also meets all the general criteria. He's got priority, he's got healing, he's got all sorts of offense, all sorts of defense. It'll help him out a lot. And the team as a whole is relatively balanced. So this team is good, it's solid, and it can definitely pull some great things off if it's played correctly, but it still falls slightly behind all of the other teams, in my opinion. Moving on to 7th place, I have the Bangla Wash, which is returning from last season with a bit of an interesting draft. It's kind of similar to my previous season in certain ways, and I'll get to that. We have Garchomp, Sylveon, Lucario, Mega Alakazam, Rotom Wash, Entei, Gourgeist, Skuntank, Miltank, Archeops, and Frogadier. Frogadier? Same thing. Now, here's the thing with this team. My team in the second season of the GPC didn't have many special walls, and this team doesn't have many physical walls, so right off the bat that hinders his team building ability pretty immensely, which could hinder him in the long run. Sorry about that. But as a whole, for right now, isn't a huge issue, so that's good for him, but we're just going to have to see how he pulls it off. He has a great offensive presence, and his whole team is generally speedy, which is horrifying in all senses. He has a Garchomp, very fast, Lucario, great revenge killer, Entei, it has extreme speed. That's scary alone. And Archeops and Frogadier, both speedy, both very quick. Frogadier still has Protean, so this whole team is very speedy as a whole. Not to mention, He has very good type synergies offensively and defensively. But one thing I do have to mention on this team is that he only has one hazard remover, and it's Skuntank. So his team is a little bit too reliant on Skuntank. And when hazards come into play, especially since he has no poison types on his team to get rid of toxic spikes, it might start to be an issue. Moving into 6th, I have the New Jersey Jumpluffs. Now, these guys were the first to finish their draft, so I got to their building and my analysis of them right away. And he came to see me for my advice on building his team. So some of this bits of this team I think work very well, but other parts not so much. So he drafted Victini, Zapdos, Milotic, Crocodile, Cresselia, Hitmontop, Registeel, Kyurem, Cradily, and Mega Pinsir. Now this team has two big weaknesses right off the bat. It's a little bit rock weak, it's a little bit ice weak. But he can work around these weaknesses thanks to the other Pokemon he has to end up checking them. He has Registeel and Crocodile to deal with that rock weakness, and I guess Hitmontop as well. And Cradily even. And the ice weaknesses can be dealt with by Victini and Milotic, and again Registeel. So it works out for him as a whole, and he has some very good hazard clearers on his team. Hitmontop and Zapdos are absolutely fantastic when it comes to hazard removal, in all senses, and his coverage is very good. Now one thing I would like to note about this team, it's not the fastest team on Earth, but he does have some very fast Pokemon that can make his team very threatening. Victini with a Scarf is horrifying. Zapdos can be fantastic, especially if it can use Tailwind to get the whole team sped up. And Mega Pinsir is one of the scariest Megas in the entire format. You never sleep on Mega Pinsir. So that's definitely going to help him out a lot when it comes to making up for a lack of speed. So that's really all I have to say about that. Moving to 5th, I have the VCU Reshiram over here, with Landorus Incarnate, Suicune, Celebi, Crobat, Mega Diancie, Meloetta, Druddigon, Escavalier, Mienshao, Shiftry, and Dusknoir. I have to note right off the bat, this team is a little bit Ice weak and a little bit Fire weak, but he has Landorus frickin' Incarnate. It was banned to Ubers. I don't know who on earth thought it would be a good idea to unban it this season, but apparently several people voted on it. So Pierre somehow made it as far as he did into the draft and ended up getting it. I don't know how nobody took it before him. Landorus Incarnate is ridiculously scary. So that right off the bat helps his team immensely. Absolutely immensely. And because of Landorus, as well as several other threats on his team has a great offensive presence. He's got Crobat, he's got Landorus, Meloetta, Druddigon, Mienshao, Mega Diancie. It's a horrifying team. And he has great hazard removal to go with it. Crobat's a great defogger, Shiftry's a great defogger. He's got slowness where he needs it, if he thinks that it could run Trick Room, and he's got speed where he needs it, in case he needs to run something with a Scarf, especially Crobat. Crobat's amazing with a Scarf. So needless to say, this team is fantastic. I really like it. And it's only in 5th. These were hard decisions, people. Very hard decisions. So these guys only barely fall short of the top 4. But this is a great team, and I think Pierre could definitely put it to some awesome use. So, moving on to 4th, I have the Swallowford FC. Now, this team, it's a very David-like team. David likes to build teams like this. It might sound a little familiar based on what you've seen David use before, but that's not a bad thing. He has Latias, Mega Charizard X, Cobalion, Raikou, Tangrowth, Jellicent, Blissey, Hippowdon, Sandslash, Magneton, and Stoutland. He's got a Sand team. There are 2 Sand teams as of right now in this league, which is atypical. 2 Sand teams is not the most common thing to see, but he got Hippowdon, which is awesome. Absolutely awesome. I don't know why on earth the Toronto Torterras didn't take Hippowdon when they had the opportunity, but Hippowdon is awesomely strong. And a very, very good wall. Not to mention he has Sandslash and Stoutland, which can both get Sand Rush, so that very much helps out his team. He has Mega Charizard X, which is a huge threat, Latios, so it's very scary, and his whole team is completely, basically resistant to hazards. Hazards do nothing against this team. If David ever struggles with hazards with this team, he has some mental problems, because let me tell you, he's got everything he needs to deal with hazards. He needs all the general criteria, he's got an even mix of walls, and despite that, his team's a little bit ground weak and a little bit fighting weak. Some examples of this, of course, being Cobalion, which is weak to both ground and fighting, Raikou's weak to ground, Magneton's weak to ground, and then the fighting weaknesses, again, Magneton, Stoutland, Blissey, Cobalion, as I already mentioned. So, some common weaknesses, but his team meets those weaknesses very well, and I think this team could be absolutely horrifying if David plays his cards right. Now, third place, I have the Kambura Zygarden. I hope I pronounced that correctly, I've been trying to for a while now. He has Manaphy, Skarmory, Alakazam, Haxorus, Aromatisse, Mega Venusaur, Cofagrigus, or Cofagrigus, however you pronounce it, Sawk, Rhyperior, Murkrow, and Empoleon. Now, this team has no offensive priority, which is a problem right off the bat. No offensive priority. He has assistant priority, or status priority, in the Murkrow. Well, I guess he has Aqua Jet and Empoleon, but Aqua Jet and Empoleon's not that common. And the team as a whole is a little bit slow, but this is where his advantages come in. He's a tad weak to ground, but that could bait people to go, not ground, a tad weak to electric, but that could bait him to go into Rhyperior so he can absorb electric types like it's nobody's business. So that's one advantage to his team. Another thing, he has a team that is fantastic for Trick Room. He has Aromatisse, which can set up Trick Rooms, and Cofagrigus, which can also set up Trick Rooms. So those two alone can help him make this team into an incredibly dangerous Trick Room team. Not to mention he's got Manaphy, which is fantastic in the draft format and known for sweeping entire teams and leagues to that extent. Mega Venusaur is a great pick because you can put things to sleep with it. He's got some really good offense in the Sawk, in the Alakazam, and the Haxorus, and the Rhyperior, of course. And Skarmory is a fantastic hazard remover, so he can deal with most hazards that come in. So as a whole, this team, very good. Really a big fan. Now, on to second. You can go by process of elimination, what I have in this. Although, it'll be on screen, so whatever. He has, I didn't even mention the team name. Shadow Valley Murkrows, I have in second, with Azumarill, Mew, Thundurus Incarnate, Salamence, Arcanine, Moongus, Regirock, Seismitoad, Sneasel, and Mega Absol. This team has a lot of very good attack and speed to it. Mega Absol is horrifying. Thundurus Incarnate is horrifying. Mew is very scary. Salamence and Arcanine are very versatile. Sneasel, my god, Sneasel. Now, one thing I will say about this team, his special attackers are not the most diverse. Mew can be a special attacker. Thundurus Incarnate is absolutely a special attacker. But then you have Arcanine and Salamence, which aren't always special attackers, and Mega Absol, which only just became a special attacker because of its Mega. So, does he have that much special offense? Not exactly. Is that going to hinder him? It might. I don't know yet, but I will say this team has very good hazard clearing, and he does have a Cleric to help him out, but this team synergizes incredibly well. Incredibly well. Especially with the Amoonguss and the Mew. My god. Those two alone make this team so much better than what it really is beforehand. And overall, I think this team could prove to be extremely dangerous when it comes to taking down other teams. So Shadow Valley Murkrows up probably higher than where anybody else put them, but I digress. Number one, Everybody already knows it, because guess what? All of the analysts share the same opinion here. Swansea City in first, with Greninja, X and Y Greninja, not Oros Greninja, meaning it still has protein, it just doesn't have stuff like Gunk Shot and I think Low Kick. I don't know for sure. But Greninja, Thundurus Therian, Jirachi, Latios, Granbull, Weezing, Umbreon, Virizion, however you pronounce it, Tauros, Mega Blastoise, and Kecleon. This team is a little bit Fairy Weak and a little bit Fighting Weak, but this team doesn't care, because there's frickin' Greninja, and Jirachi, and Latios. And they're horrifying. They're all horrifying. This whole team is extremely effective in the draft format. Kecleon and Tauros are great normal types. Virizion is very scary, despite its 4 times weakness to flying. You have Weezing and Granbull, which are two of the best, if not the absolute best, you can draft from NU in the draft format as a whole. And Granbull was recently moved up to RU because it's that good. Then you have Jirachi, which is extremely versatile. You have an even mix of walls, a great offensive presence, and it meets all the general criteria. This team can destroy everything. Absolutely everything. And Sasha, the coach of the Swansea City, has been stepping up his game the past several seasons. So I'm really hoping when it comes to this team, he can pull it off and make it a fantastic season. But anyway, enough blabbering. My throat's getting dry. This is Jaybird63.9. Thank you all for watching. And now back to Lars, unless I am at the end of the video. So, see you guys next time.